As an organization that races all around the world and actively promotes diversity, I do believe that F1 and the FIA have a duty of care to ensure that the people that are the faces of the sport aren't getting racial abuse thrown at them by fans and people of the industry. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This video is going to be a little bit different because I'm showing my face. Okay, all right, focus. If you're new here, I am the Race Edit, and I like to speak on all things Formula One and all things motorsport. I've been away for a little bit, but I figured, hey, might as well drop a new video before the end of the year. So if you're here, it's because you want to know what I'm talking about, and that is diversity in Formula One. So let's get seated. I'm sat. Sorry. From the very inception of Formula One, it has always been a boys' club. I mean, compared to the many hundreds of male drivers, there's only ever been 5 female racing drivers to enter into a Grand Prix race weekend. There's only ever been 1 black driver to race in the sport, and he's still currently racing today, and only a handful of people of color to race in Formula One. And of course, this is due to a multitude of reasons. One being that F1 has always been a white male-dominated sport, and that is just due to where it was incepted. But you also have to come from a specific socioeconomic class to even think about racing in the sport. I mean, even now, if you aren't from a semi-wealthy background, there are a lot of sacrifices that need to be made from karting up to even think about racing in the sport or to even afford to race in the sport. And this is just due to the fact that, unfortunately, Formula One is not just about talent. While you could be the most talented driver ever, if you can't afford the cost of Formula One or if you can't get the right sponsorships, then being a Formula One driver probably just isn't in your cards. The reason I bring all of this up is because the sport is expanding. While it has always been a global sport, the FIA and Formula One have actively been working to expand the F1 global market. And I believe that if they're going to continue on this trajectory of expansion, then they need to get with the times. If they're going to expand to a global audience, then what is being shown should be reflecting said audience. Now, I don't want to seem that I'm being a Debbie Downer because I'm not. F1 has been actively working towards their 2025 mission that they set out in 2020, and I'm happy about that. But I do have to say that for a sport that's been around since the 1950s, this conversation should have been happening earlier. And this is not just limited to Formula One, first of all. This is limited to pretty much every sport that's out there, that conversations about diversity in sports should have been happening at a much earlier time and not just at 2020 when it was a acceptable time to start speaking about it. But Formula One has actively been working towards their 2025 mission that they set out, and I've been seeing the changes. But the issue is that the conversation about diversity needs to be more open and allowed in Formula One, which I don't think it really is. So that being said, hey, I'm having the conversation. Let's talk about diversity in Formula One and why it is so important, or why I believe that it's so important. With the first topic being race. With the current driver lineup, I want to talk about 5 specific drivers, and they are Zhou Guanyu, Yuki Tsunoda, Sergio Checo Perez, Alex Albon, and Lewis Hamilton. We know that every driver ever in Formula One has faced heavy criticism, especially when they are not producing the results that are expected of them. So I'm not saying that these 5 drivers are the only ones to ever receive criticism. The only difference is that with these drivers is they receive the same criticism as their colleagues, but on top of that, they also receive racism. As an organization that races all around the world and actively promotes diversity, I do believe that F1 and the FIA have a duty of care to ensure that the people that are the faces of the sport aren't getting racial abuse thrown at them by fans and people of the industry. I mean, of course, you can't control what people say, but if you care about your drivers, then you have to let it be known that there will be repercussions given to people who continue to disrespect the very people that risk their lives for the sake of our entertainment. For instance, let's start with Zhou Guanyu. He is the first Chinese driver to ever race in Formula One, if I'm correct. I'm just going to say that he is, but I'm pretty sure he is. And he had an interview with The Race where he spoke out about his experience in racial abuse that he has received since becoming a Formula One driver. He said that, in the interview with The Race, he said that the people in the paddock were always okay. It's more on the outside. The fans on the internet, the keyboard writers, they are being a bit harsh or unfair. I've lived in this kind of situation many times in my career. I'm used to how to get rid of all this unnecessary tension to just focus purely on the job. When this happens, the only way I try to deal with it is to keep it quiet, just do things on the track, do the job, which is the most efficient way. But it's still quite unfair or bad to see how people are still judged by all nationalities. It's definitely not the way we should go forward. And he's not the first driver of these five to say that, hey, when I receive racial abuse, I like to keep quiet and just show them on track. It seems to be a common thread between these five drivers. But additionally, as I said earlier, it's not just the fans. There are other people in the industry who, because F1 has just been a bubble for so long, they're starting to get called out on the verbiage that's being used. I mean, for instance, there was a whole Sky Sports slash Martin Brundle incident where, or should I say controversy, where Brundle, unbeknownst to him, used a derogatory term to describe Zhou. And while Sky has issued an apology, I do have to say that it should have just never happened. One, because for a sport that is known to be the pinnacle of motorsport, and for Brundle himself, who is a former F1 driver and has been a broadcaster for goodness knows how long, he should be aware of the verbiage that he is using. He should be aware that, hey, I don't know, maybe it's not 1950 anymore. There's a global audience that is watching the sport. There are fans of different backgrounds and ethnicities that are watching the sport that, while Brundle may not know what the term is, the people watching will know and they will call you out on it. And I think with all the diversity and inclusion training that Formula One is saying that they're doing, they need to also make sure that their broadcasters and former F1 drivers who are still very much associated with the sport are getting educated. Simple as that. I mean, when we look at Tsunoda, a lot of the criticism that he gets is based on the colorful words that he likes to use. He can be a bit angry at times, and you know what? There have been other Formula One drivers that have been angry at times. Like, Tsunoda's not the only one to ever just say a slew of colorful words. But I think what's interesting about Yuki when I was doing my research is that he hasn't really spoken out about racism, if any, that he's received in Formula One. It's just been little microaggressions and comments that fans have noticed that are like, that's weird. And I have to say, I agree. While Tsunoda has said that he and Helmut Marko have a great working relationship, or just have a great relationship in general, and that he wouldn't be here without Helmut Marko, I always think it's so weird when Helmut Marko describes Yuki. I mean, I'm not going to speak for Yuki. I'm not going to speak on Yuki because that's not my business. These are just things that I've noticed that I thought, hey, let's talk about it. Why not? For instance, I'm not going to speak for Yuki because he said himself that he sees Helmut Marko as a friend, as a mentor, and not just as his boss. He says that 50% of the time they talk about other things outside of the track and 50% about racing. So it's not my place to be like, Yuki, you should be mad that Helmut Marko said this, that, and the other about you, because I'm not Yuki. It is just a bit weird when Marko makes weird microaggressive comments towards Yuki, or when speaking on Yuki, such as saying that Yuki was probably fascinated by De Vries's perfect English, and this was during the time that Yuki Tsunoda and Nick De Vries were teammates. In an interview, Helmut Marko said that De Vries spoke relatively much, and his perfect English probably fascinated Yuki. And while on its face it might not seem that that comment is bad, but this is not the first time he's made some weird microaggressive comments towards Yuki. And if you don't know what a microaggression is, microaggressions are brief, everyday derogatory slights or insults that communicate hostility and bias towards a marginalized person or group. So Marko making that comment, or Marko calling Yuki our little Japanese, while on its face may not seem crazy, It is a microaggression. And if we learned anything from the whole Checo and Helmut Marko situation, you're not going to call out your boss when they make comments at you, especially when getting a Formula One seat is already so hard, and when you know that your seat can be given away just like that. Because of how hard it is to get a Formula One seat, and then when you get that seat, you have to hold on to it and prove that you're worth it. It doesn't create a space. It doesn't really create a space where you can just call out your boss and be like, don't call me that or don't say that, because there's always going to be another driver that's ready to take your seat and they will give it away. Which is why it's important to speak on things like diversity in Formula One, so the drivers don't feel that they have to shy away from comments that are made at them. There shouldn't even be a place in Formula One where drivers have to choose between their seat or calling out their boss who makes racist comments towards them. And this is what I mean by F1 has a diversity problem. If you're going to hire drivers of a different racial background, then you need to ensure that the people who should be their biggest advocates are also not the ones that are creating a harmful space for them where they can't speak on comments that are made about them. Does that make sense? Looking at the camera like you guys are going to nod and say yes. Yes. But while we're on the topic of Dr. Helmut Marko, I really didn't want to bring this up, but I can't speak about diversity in Formula One and not speak on what made waves this year when it comes to Marko and Sergio Checo Perez. As we all know, Checo had a very rocky 2023 season where many people were rightfully unhappy with his driving, and they were questioning if he should even have a seat at all to begin with, especially with how ruthless Red Bull has been in the past with letting go of drivers, and how they even did it earlier this year with an AlphaTauri driver. We know that working as a Red Bull racing driver can be a very pressure-induced environment, especially when you have a driver like Max Verstappen, who was your teammate, who was just producing results left, right, and center. Like, he is. He is. The car was an absolute rocket ship, so it wasn't making any sense why it just wasn't clicking for Checo. But all of those criticisms were fair. It was when Helmut Marko decided to do another interview where he spoke on Checo that was racist. Like, if we're going to be honest, it was racist. It was racist. In the interview, he made a comment about Checo's driving where he stated that we know he has problems in qualifying. He has fluctuations in form. He's South American, and he's just not as completely focused in his head as Verstappen or as Vettel. There's a lot wrong with Marko's comments that have been discussed by multiple people, but one. Checo is Mexican. Mexico is not in South America. Mexico is in North America. And two, what does comparing where Vettel and Verstappen are from versus where Checo's from have to do with anything when it comes to their racecraft? Absolutely nothing. While the FIA has issued out a formal warning to Marko regarding his comments and Checo has accepted Helmut Marko's apology, there is a bigger problem in this entire situation, and that is, if these are comments that are made by a senior level member of the current reigning team of F1, what does it say about Formula One as a whole? I mean, Hamilton said it best. He said, while we say that there is no place for any kind of discrimination within the sport, to have leaders and people in their position making comments like this is not positive. I think it just highlights the work that still needs to be done in the first place. And when we think about the situation as a whole, Red Bull Racing themselves did not put out a formal statement in respect of their driver. Christian Horner said that Marko spoke directly to Sergio about it, and I think you're always learning in life, even at 80 years of age, and inevitably lessons have been learned. He said that Marko is not an employee of Red Bull Racing, so in terms of why didn't we put out a statement, he's part of the Red Bull wider group, and the group issued that apology through the Severus TV channel. We've spoken about it. I know he regrets what he said. And my issue with this is that while Helmut Marko may not be a part of Red Bull Racing, the average fan probably doesn't know that. I mean, they see him at each race beside Christian Horner, who is the team principal, and assume that he's directly involved with the ins and outs of Red Bull Racing. I mean, he goes to many news outlets and makes comments on the drivers, so of course people are going to expect a formal statement from Red Bull Racing. And again, while Helmut Marko may not be a Red Bull Racing employee, Sergio Checo Perez is. And the least that Red Bull Racing could have done to show support to their driver and to Mexican fans alike and South American fans is put out a formal statement saying that they do not stand for these kind of comments. But nope, they just brushed it under the rug. A Formula One team should not be allowing these comments to be made. A Formula One team who is the current face of Formula One should be loudly saying, hey, we don't stand for this, especially because it is one of our drivers that was subject to the racism. But they didn't do that. They put it under the rug, and Helmut Marko was given a formal warning, and people moved on like nothing happened. And that's what happens when you don't have conversations about diversity out loud in these kind of spaces. Moving on to Alex Albon. Alex Albon is a London-born Thai driver, and he races under the Thai flag. He's joked about this before, but there is always some truth to the joke. He says that either I'm called the London-born Thai if I do a good job, or I'm not British at all if I do a bad job. And not to make a mountain out of a molehill, but as I said, he says this in a joking manner, but there is also truth to it. And it does say a lot about the world of Formula One and the people in the industry and news outlets who make these comments. They claim him when he does a good job and disregard his Thai identity, but when he does bad, it's simply just the Thai driver, and I've heard it myself many times. And making these comments, it is an unconscious bias, and this unconscious bias is just so ingrained in the culture of Formula One, and it does need to be checked. It does need to be actively checked. And finally, the last driver I want to speak about is Lewis Hamilton. Sorry, this is like my 100th video where I speak about him in some capacity, because one, he's my favorite driver. I'm allowed to speak about him. But no. Hamilton has been racing in Formula One since 2007. In 2008, during the Spanish Grand Prix, there were many fans heckling at him, but the worst of it was that there was a group of people who were wearing blackface, were wearing curly wigs, and had white shirts that said Hamilton's family on them. And they did this for no other reason but just plain old racism. Mind you, this was Hamilton's second year in Formula One. And then we fast forward to 2020, where it's alleged that a senior F1 member said that if Lewis was so committed to the cause, and the cause being Black Lives Matter, perhaps he should donate all of his salary to it. And to say that, I say, does Formula One really care about diversity if senior members allegedly are allowed to brazenly make such comments? And the issue with comments like this is that people like Lewis Hamilton, Alex Albon, Zhou Guanyu, Yuki Tsunoda, Sergio Checo Perez, while it's already uncomfortable for them to hear such comments, they have more space. They have more of a space to be able to raise their concerns about it. But then when we go down the poll, and there's minority groups hearing comments about race and how F1 has just brazenly ignored such comments, how does that actively promote diversity? How does that make those people want to stay in the industry when the industry doesn't really care about them? And again, as I said, F1 is working towards their 2025 mission, which is appreciated, but you also have to be willing to speak out against senior members who make these derogatory terms, because you can't try to cater to a global audience while still allowing these comments to be made. And it's funny because people love to hate on Hamilton for making a lot of things about race, especially in more recent years, but for him everything is about race. I mean, when the whole 2008 thing happened with the Spanish fans, yeah, people spoke about it, but did anything really change? No, because we're still having this conversation right now in 2023, maybe 2024. I don't know when this video is coming out, but I bring these 5 drivers up specifically because they've each faced a level of betrayal from F1 fans and people in the industry alike that their colleagues have not received. And while people hate the uncomfortable conversation about race in Formula One, it is an important topic to have because you can't just be racing in these countries, but your fans and people in the industry are also perpetrating racism. It just doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, like it just doesn't make sense. And I didn't want to come into this video where it felt like that I was angry, because I'm not. I'm just disappointed. And I hope that as we enter into 2024 that things can be better. So with that being said, let's talk about women in motorsports. Again, I made another video about them. Did I say that already? I can't remember. Female viewership in Formula One has grown exponentially higher since 2018. That is thanks to a lot more people having access to Formula One due to Drive to Survive. And I believe that with more viewership, it means more interest in the industry. And this can range from many different things. This can range from being a racing driver, from being an engineer, from being a steward, from working in sports media, motorsport related, from being a broadcaster, etc. The list goes on. I mean, look at me. I'm here and you're watching my video. If someone told me 10 years ago that I'd be making YouTube videos about everything F1, I would have looked at you sideways. It's just something that I didn't know if people would accept. But yeah, I say all this to say that female viewership in Formula One has grown. So imagine how disheartening it was to see the very calculated attack on Susie Wolff, who is probably one, keyword one, of the most prominent female figures in Formula One at this current moment. And she was subject to baseless accusations on her character, and to see Susie Wolff be reduced to just being someone's wife when she is her own person outside of her marriage and has already been a figure in motorsports prior to her marriage was disgusting. Now, I'm probably not going to go too deep into this because maybe I might make another video on it. I'm thinking I will. And if I don't, so sorry. But again, as I said, this is a sport that has a very large female audience, and they are actively working to ensure that they have a female racer by, I think, 2031. I could be wrong. Let me just fact check right now. Okay, so Susie Wolff is hoping to have a female driver in Formula One by 2030. So I was close. But yeah, it's a sport where they want to have a female driver by 2030. And yet it feels that Formula One has taken one step forward and 3 steps back. And this just seems to happen time and time again when it comes to females in F1. For instance, don't want to talk about this. Well, I have it here, so I might as well. But there was a team principal who made a comment about the female viewership, and they said that it's bringing in a lot of young girls because of all these great looking young drivers. And honestly, people are right to be mad, because as a team principal, you should just have more couth when it comes to making such comments. And to be honest, as a team principal, you shouldn't be, if you're going to speak about female fans of Formula One, you need to speak about what Formula One is doing to keep and retain such female fans, not just it being about them fangirling over young boys. And for myself, speaking for myself personally, as a female fan of Formula One who happens to live not in Europe, I promise you that I'm not waking up at gnarly hours of the day or staying up extremely late just to watch hot young drivers. I'm staying up and waking up really early because I really love this sport. But hey, if young girls want to watch Formula One for the hot guys, then so be it. It honestly shouldn't matter. But I can assure you that people are watching the sport because they're into the sport and not just because of the male racers. If there was 20 female racers, I'd still be watching it, but we don't have any. But I bring up the Susie Wolff calculated attacker, and I bring up that team principal because these may seem like isolated incidents, but there's just been way too many of them for it to be considered isolated. And when you have higher ups in the industry moving this way, it does trickle down to the fans and lets them know that this type of behavior is acceptable in the sport when honestly and really it shouldn't be. Especially now with the new season of F1 Academy coming up, where each F1 team is going to have their livery and a driver racing for them. F1 needs to create a space where the only form of criticism that is coming their way for these girls is about their racing and their racecraft, and it should have nothing to do with the misogyny and the fact that they are females. Now, I'm just really passionate about this topic because I do think it needs to be discussed more in Formula One, and that people like to shy away from it, but we shouldn't, though. We shouldn't. We are entering into 2024, and we should be having these conversations freely. And I hope that we can have an open discussion about it, because I do think we do need to speak more about it. And you know what? I was a bit nervous and I was looking at my notes a lot in this video, so maybe I will make another video about diversity in Formula One where I'm a bit more composed and not so freak out, because I do think it is an important conversation to have and that we should continue to have it, because that's the only way that we can actually have change, is speaking about it and taking action. But I just want to say that I really really do love this sport. I love F1 so much, and even though it might seem that I'm like, boo, do better, I just want it to stay. I just want it to stay a positive community for everyone who's a fan of this sport. I think we should just be able to watch it without the external factors of misogyny and racism, in general. Um, so yeah, thank you for sticking around and watching this video. I hope that one, it actually goes up and that it's not just a cluster of mess and garble, and that it's actually coherent and that I made sense. And if I didn't, I'm sorry, and I will try again next time. But thank you for taking the time to watch my video, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, everyone.